Hello, everyone, and welcome to RSVP in Action, Mobilizing a Generation. Thank you so much for joining us. While I go over some housekeeping notes, feel free to let us know where you're calling in from in the chat, making sure to send it to all panelists and attendees. As always, all lines are on mute for this call, and we'll keep them on mute throughout the course of the call, which means that if you have questions at any time, please let us know in the Q&A box. If you have any technical issues, just go ahead and drop us a note in the chat box, and our wonderful webinar producers will help you out. If you're having issues with the audio, we do recommend having the system call you. If you're having visual problems, just leave and come back, and that should fix it. And lastly, we are recording this call. If you do not wish to be recorded, you can be disconnected at any time. The recording and the slides will be made available on the RSVP competition site, nationalservice.gov/RSVP competition. It's great to see everyone chiming in the chat box. Just a reminder to make sure to send your messages to all panelists and attendees. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Ann O.T. and I am Senior Program Officer for Training and Knowledge Management. Super excited to host you guys today. A couple of things. I wanted to introduce you to a couple of my colleagues, Courtney Sutton and Debbie Truchon, who are on the line as well. You will see them in the chat and in the Q&A pod answering your questions. One thing about questions, and I have to give this caveat each time, but because this is a competitive process, there are a couple of questions that we will not be able to answer for you. One, if your particular question is specific or requires a lot of context and discussion. If that is the case, I will direct you to the email on the slide, 2021 rsvp@cns.gov. And the other type of question that we can't answer because of the competition, we cannot provide individual coaching or advice. So this is a competitive process. We want to get great applications, and we want to make sure that it is fair to everyone who is involved. I can't tell you what to put on your application. I can't tell you whether to start your program this way or that way, but it is my goal that I provide you with all of the tools available to you and help you understand the requirements and rules a little bit better. A couple more housekeeping. A reminder, this is the third in a series of 5 webinars. It's the second repetition, and we'll be finishing up this week, tomorrow and Thursday. And now it's come to the time where we get to learn a little bit about you all who are on the line. So I'll ask our webinar producers to put our first poll up. And we want to know if your organization has received a federal grant before, including one from CNCS. Give you a couple more seconds to answer that. All right, it looks like the majority of you have received something from the federal government before. All right, for our next question, how well do you know Senior Corps? Couple more seconds for this one. All right. Welcome to those of you who are brand new to all of this, and welcome to our current grantees. Good to see you all. For our next question, how would you describe the primary field of your organization? And that's okay if there are multiple, just choose the one that best describes you. All right. And I'm actually going to ask that we skip the next poll question, go to the last one. Have you attended any of our other webinars in this series? All right. For those of you who have, welcome back. For those of you who haven't yet, feel free to watch the ones that we've done. All of the sessions that we've done till now have been posted on the website. All right, so here is our agenda for the next hour. Before we dive into the heart of today, we're going to go over some basic facts of the competition. We will be talking about community impact, talking about leveraging volunteers to make a difference. We're going to give a little bit of a refresher to go over what the RSVP program is and how it works. And then we'll start to get practical. We'll look at focus area and funding priorities, two different things that are very important to master for your application. We will look at sponsors and stations, two key terms, and how those two kinds of organizations can come together for great impact. And then we will look at some examples of Senior Corps and in specific RSVP programming. And then we'll end with some questions and answers. So let us start with the competition basics. So you're probably familiar with this slide, but we are currently accepting applications for the RSVP program. Applications are due 5 p.m. Eastern time on September 1st. Although if you were in our earlier webinars, which it seems the majority of you were, we do strongly encourage organizations to get their applications submitted well in advance of that deadline. The most important document you'll probably notice are the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the document that lays out all rules and that guides this competition, and it talks about what to include in your application, the evaluation criteria, the review process, all of that other good stuff. And then another important document is Appendix A. This competition is geographically limited. The way that RSVP works is that certain geographic service areas are open at a certain amount of funding with a certain number of unduplicated volunteers. We will take a look of an example of this as we go on a little bit further. If you haven't been able to join in on our webinars, just know that this is the document that you will look at to see what geographic service areas, what specific cities and counties are available to be served through the competition. It is some important information. You can learn a little bit about some of the other tools that you will see on the competition homepage here. There are a lot of resources available to help you. So what is this program that you are interested in competing for? I would say the core defining characteristic is engaging Americans 55 and older in service. That's the core of it. Americans 55 and older engaged in service to the community. What is wonderful about this program is that it is all about flexibility. The RSVP program is meant to meet community needs. It is meant to give you out there in your communities the ability to say, I see an opportunity for older adults to make a difference on this particular issue. And then you can mobilize however you see fit to make that difference. That includes creating volunteer experiences that are tailored to those individuals that is right for them. We get asked during these trainings, how long should an RSVP volunteer serve each week? And the answer is, I can't tell you. That is up to you based on what you think is right for your community. Sometimes I get questions like, how many stations and partners do you think I should have? And again, I don't have the answer because it's up to you to figure out what you think is right for your community. Working with your community partners, working with these older adults in that community, working with maybe a board of directors or an advisory council, locally driven, and that's really crucial. And when you take a deeper look at our competition materials, you will see a lot of the information speaks about having that local presence. Two topics that we'll discuss a lot today are at the bottom of the screen. we do require all of our RSVP grantees to use what we call national performance measures to tell the story of their service. We are a federal program. These grants are paid by federal dollars, taxpayer dollars, and as taxpayers, you are stakeholders, and we use the performance measures to measure our impact and report that back to the American people through your representatives in Congress and the executive branch. But not every single piece of that activity that RSVP grant does needs to be captured in that way. What do I mean by that? What we say is that you have to have a certain number of unduplicated volunteers programmed into national performance measures. That is measured in a specific way for every $1,000 in federal funding that you receive. A little bit later on in today's session, we're going to do an example so you can see how it works. So don't worry if you have questions about that right now. Okay, so we've done some of our RSVP basics and we will use a lot of that information, but I do want to pause for a second to clarify two pieces of the notice of funding opportunity. You will see us refer to both the focus area and funding priority. These are different things and they are important. I will jump to the notice of opportunity. You should see it on your screen. You'll see some screenshots of the NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, specifically page 1. And we see that in order to carry out Congress's intent and maximize the impact of investment in national service, CNCS has the following focus areas. It then lists them, and they are described in a little bit of depth just below that. In addition, starting on page 3, we have the section under funding priorities. So applicants are required to address one or more of the focus areas above on pages 1 or 2. CNCS will not consider applications that do not address any of the focus areas. In addition to that, the focus areas, CNCS is particularly interested in supporting applications that propose to include one or more of the priorities listed on page 3. And you can see we have another list here. But how do we make sense of these two different requests? Let's do some compare and contrast. So first, focus areas are typically broader than funding priorities. When we look at the list, we will see something like opioid abuse as a funding priority because that is very specific, but healthy futures in general, that is a focus area here, so much broader. All RSVP projects must have some activity in at least one focus area. For funding priorities, those are optional, but we are particularly interested in funding those types of activities. When it comes to performance measurement, all of the focus areas tie specifically to a specific national performance measure. For example, if you pick education, you have a set of performance measures that go right hand in hand with education. Now, you can capture all of our funding priorities and national performance measures too, but they might cross over some lines. So you may need to be a little bit creative. You can kind of pick and choose and figure out how to navigate through the performance measures. It's not as directly one-to-one. Then you can see on the screen right now, we often refer to capacity building. It's a key goal. And then you have our funding priorities, disaster services, economic opportunities, specifically workforce development, education, specifically intergenerational programs, access to care, specifically opioid abuse, and so on and so forth. So you can see some of those relationships already discussed. In some cases, it's a one-to-one correspondence. In other cases, you will see that we asked to get a little bit more specific for those funding priorities. So it's not just economic opportunity, it is workforce development. So we have a little bit more specificity. In other cases, you will see that there's actually one focus area that has multiple funding priorities. So you'll see on the screen, These all fall under the banner of healthy futures. So that demonstrates, the broadness of some of those focus areas. And then finally, we've got evidence-based programming to the funding priorities. And that, of course, cuts across all of our focus areas. And you can have an evidence-based program in pretty much any one of these focus areas. It's really about the level of evidence behind an intervention, not describing the particular domain where an intervention works. It's important to have these things clearly separated in your mind. And we'll talk about that even more, in particular, the focus areas, because those do tie to our performance measures. And that is how you're going to tell us the story about the story of service. I know you're probably waiting for those examples. Don't worry, they are coming. But before we go too much further, I'm going to pause and see if we've got any questions thus far. Courtney and Debbie?
Nothing specific yet. Let's come back later.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, so a couple of terms to define for you. Our last bit of groundwork before we get to start looking at some examples. You're going to hear me use these first two terms interchangeably, sponsor and grantee. That is what we here at Senior Corps call the organization that becomes legally responsible for stewarding grant funds. That is different than a station, which is a community partner where RSVP volunteers serve. Now, a sponsor can also be a station. Actually, there can be some overlap in these terms. We just want to be clear about what they mean. The sponsor is an organization that receives RSVP funding and is legally responsible for stewarding grant funds. On this slide here, we've got an example of what an RSVP program that focuses on multiple issues with multiple partners might look like. So you can see Senior Corps makes the grant to a sponsor, which recruits volunteers and places them at external stations, other organizations, if you will. They could also be conducting a wide variety of activities. One could be a food bank, for example. Another could be a school. On this slide, we've got another example of a type of program model. So Senior Corps can make a grant to a sponsor that runs its own programs. They may be very focused, working only in the area of education, for example. The sponsor could then go recruit volunteers to work on its own programs. Again, so us here at CNCS and Senior Corps, we provide funds to the sponsoring organization. The grantee then becomes legally responsible for managing the grant. They go out and recruit volunteers in their community and place them at community stations. These are just ways to think about how you can structure RSVP activity. I always like to share some of our stories, and you can find this on the Senior Corps Stories page. Different stories of our different programs, but here are a couple RSVP volunteers. First off, we got Mr. Ken. He is a Senior Corps volunteer who enjoys leaving his comfort zone. He thrives on leaving his comfort zone. The 72-year-old Springfield, Virginia resident had no experience working with special needs children, but it was something he always wanted to do. After he joined Senior Corps, Ken found an opportunity to do just that. As an RSVP volunteer, he teaches children with autism how to swim. He recently expanded his RSVP volunteer service to help high school students become financially literate. One day, it occurred to him, why couldn't the financial literacy curriculum be taught to special needs students as well? Ken worked with a teacher to adapt the curriculum so special needs students could have access to it too. Ken recently told new RSVP recruits, what you get back from volunteering is like 20 times more than what you are giving. He implored them to venture outside of their comfort zone. A great example. Another one, we've got Mr. Ray here. In 1999, he decided to spend his time working for a soldier and his family. Ray, a retired Special Forces soldier, served in Vietnam and had been volunteering at Fort Riley American Red Cross for the past 20 years, earning respect, appreciation, and recognition along the way. He was recognized with many awards. and he has been serving for 12 years, and that is not unusual. The average term of service in RSVP is 8 years. We've got a lot of those long-term volunteers. These are some great stories, and I'm here to say they only scratch the surface of what RSVP is doing out in the communities right now. I know all of you who are current grantees have stories just like those in your community. The kinds of experiences that these show are for both older Americans and the community members to serve. And we are actually going to do that through a fictional town called Verona. So, all right, everyone, welcome to Verona. What a great place to live. Wow, it's a wonderful place to live, and it's a wonderful opportunity because they have counties up for competition this year. So we need to do a little bit of math. If you recall, at the beginning of our webinar, I said we would come back and talk about national performance measures. And in particular, I said when applying for an RSVP grant, you need to program at least one unduplicated volunteer in national performance measures for every $1,000 in federal funding that you receive. You might also remember me talking about Appendix A, the document that spells out the connections between geographic service area and the amounts of funding that you can receive and the total number of unduplicated volunteers you must have, the package deal. So when you look at Appendix A, you will see a long line of lists like this where they have the state, a code for the opportunity number, and then these three things, the geographic service area, annual funding, and unduplicated volunteers as a package deal. If you were applying to serve Montague and Capulet counties in Verona, that means you can request no more than the total amount of funding available, and you need to include at least this number, 100 unduplicated volunteers. I like to demonstrate how these are all connected. So the first thing an organization applying to serve in Verona will want to do is figure out how many volunteers they need to program into national performance measures. To do that, you would divide $75,000, the total annual funding available, by $1,000 because our cost per unduplicated volunteer threshold is for every $1,000 of funding you receive, you need to program one unduplicated volunteer into national performance measure outcomes. So just knowing that, can anyone do the math for me quickly? Knowing that a successful applicant would receive $75,000 in federal funding, how many volunteers would they need to program into national performance measure outcomes? You can let me know in the chat, sending it to all panelists and attendees. Tanya came in first with the 75, pretty straightforward math, but that is correct, 75 volunteers that they need to program into national performance measures. But per Appendix A, they need at least 100 unduplicated volunteers total. Now, those remaining volunteers can also be programmed into national performance measures, or they could be programmed into what we call other community priorities, which is just a big catch-all term for anything that you can measure using our standard measurements. So it can really mean anything that is an allowable activity. We don't allow anything like political activity or religious activity, but if it's an allowable activity, it can be included in other community priorities. So in order to get to that minimum level total number of unduplicated volunteers, let's say that they program only the amount that they need into these national performance measures, how many volunteers would they then need in other community priorities, this catch-all, to meet the total listed on Appendix A for them? 25. Thanks, Genevieve. So they would program at minimum 75 volunteers into national performance measure work plans, and then at least 25 or 25, not at least, 25 could go into other community priorities. So we've got Verona here, a wonderful place to live, but like any community, it has its challenges. First, while many schools are doing well, 3 have substantial numbers of students that are reading below grade level. Second, like many communities, Verona has seen documented cases of opioid abuse increase significantly in the past 10 years. Third, Verona's mayor just launched an elder abuse task force to deal with the sudden increase in reports of fraudsters targeting the elderly in the area. And then finally, because of the pandemic, numbers of food banks have noticed increased need for their mobile pantries due to an increase in food insecurity. Verona has its challenges, but there are a lot of people in Verona who see it as an opportunity for older Americans to be a part of the solution, and they will apply for an RSVP grant to do that. So let's look at ways that they might. So first up, we've got an organization here, the Verona Department of Aging. They have lots of different connections across the community. They really focus on serving seniors and giving seniors meaningful opportunities to serve. And because of that, they are thinking they have the community partnerships to tackle some of these issues, to place volunteers in stations with external partners, lots of external partners. So think back to our first diagram. It kind of looked like this. So if Verona's Department of Aging got a grant from CNCS, what would they do? They might use those funds to recruit volunteers and for education. Their stations are actually going to be schools and community organizations. They're going to work with reading partners, programs that pair older Americans with students to help them read in schools, and they're going to be the stations. They are going to partner with another station, a local health agency perhaps, that provides counseling support to help combat the opioid epidemic. Now, the volunteers are not going to be the counselors themselves. They're probably not going to be offering medical advice or anything like that, but they could be providing administrative support, helping referrals to other agencies, collecting or distributing information, things like that. They will join up with the organization that chairs the task force that the mayor created and send some volunteers that way to serve as a training, perhaps. And then finally, they're going to partner with the local food bank who has been providing curbside pickup meal kits. All external partnerships, all volunteers doing meaningful work, but it plays out in different ways. So that's their story. And what they're going to need to do is figure out how to tell us at CNCS that story of service using our national performance measures. To do that, they are going to use a couple of tools, the performance measure instructions, Appendix B, and the work plan development worksheets. The performance measure instructions tell you about specific performance measures available in a category of activity. And then the worksheets are just what they sound like. They let you experiment with what you're going to do. From our competition page, nationalservice.gov/RSVP competition, you can select on Appendix B, performance measure instructions. So let's say we wanted to figure out what performance measure we should use for the activities in combating opioid abuse. We've got tables, and these tables summarize more detailed information that occurs later in the document. And they specify output and outcome pairings of different types of activities. So if we are interested in our opioid program for the Verona Department of Aging, that is probably going to be in the Healthy Futures area where we are. And you can see it listed as an activity for many different pairs. So what they'll do is use this document to kind of figure out how the different types of activities that they are planning to do kind of fit into our performance measures. It looks like H17 might be a good one, the number of individuals with increased health knowledge. We are speculating what the activities will be like. Maybe they are helping to distribute or share information Maybe you want to choose this outcome, a number of individuals reporting a change in a behavior or intent. You will have to choose an output and outcome pairing. And the outputs, you'll notice, are pretty consistent. They usually are going to be about the number of individuals served. These are just some tables, and if you go down and look through the document, you can see that there is some more information about how to use each of these. The worksheets, the work plan development worksheets, contain more information than this, but this is a pretty good summary of some of the most important information that you will have to choose, or the Verona Department of Aging will have to choose. So to identify the focus area for each of their activities, and then they will choose an output and an outcome. It's not here, but they will also have to choose targets for them, the number of individuals they expect to serve and the number of individuals they expect to create an outcome for. And then they will have to assign unduplicated volunteers to that activity. So in this example, the Verona Department of Aging decided to assign 45 volunteers to that Reading Peers program. Excuse me. 15 volunteers to that opioid program, 10 volunteers to economic opportunity. Can anyone tell me how many volunteers they would need to assign to that Healthy Futures work plan to meet their national performance measure requirements? What is the lowest number that could go there? And it looks like Samara and Kathy got it, 5. To meet their national performance measure requirement. That's the requirement that says for every $1,000 of federal funding you receive, you need to program volunteers in specific kinds of work plans, these specific sets of performance measures. The other volunteers, the remaining 25, can be in the other community priorities category, and they can be doing anything that doesn't fit into our other measures. Maybe they have a couple of volunteers who will be creating face masks or creating care packages for essential workers, things like that. Something that is necessary for your community needs-wise, but doesn't necessarily result in those discrete outputs and outcomes that Senior Corps measures. When you submit your application, you do need to identify one primary focus area, but that doesn't actually carry with it any specific mathematical requirements. So you don't have to program any specific number of volunteers there. Verona's Department of Aging will probably choose education as the work plan that probably reflects its greatest impact. Let's look at a couple other examples. So we've got a new organization here, Active Aging Verona. What they are going to do is at first they're going to be looking at having external community partners. In this case, it looks a little similar to the Verona Department of Aging, but they say we have the ability to create our own training program and run a program related to elder abuse, and they've got support, let's say from the mayor, Mayor Juliet, to do so. So they're going to be providing, they're going to be providing volunteers to external stations, but also managing their own program and placing volunteers in their own program, and that is okay. This might be what it looks like in their work plan. The big difference here is that Active Aging Verona has decided not to have any other community priorities, and that's an option. You don't need to have volunteers programmed into that catch-all category. You can program more than the minimum in performance measures, national performance measures, and that is okay. They are still providing the total number of unduplicated volunteers that was listed on Appendix A, and they're still fulfilling our minimum national performance measure requirement. In fact, they're exceeding it, and that's okay too. This is what fits their needs. The last example we've got the Verona Harvest. As its name suggests, Verona Harvest is focused on food security. So maybe what they're going to do is have one work plan and one focus area. They're going to have external stations do it, but that is all they're going to do. So they just want to focus on food security, and they're going to program all of their volunteers that they need to meet their national performance measure requirement into one work plan. And again, that's okay. There's no minimum number of focus areas above one. One is the minimum number of focus area, and there's no maximum other than all of the other focus areas that are available. So my question to all of you then, what determines a successful application? You can answer what you think determines a successful application in the chat, making sure to send it to all panelists and attendees. Give you a couple of seconds to formulate what you think. What determines a successful application? Got full compliance, okay. Complete. Alignment and unduplicated volunteers. Meet the funding priorities, focus area, all required documents, detailed performance measures, on time. Cynthia knows me, on time, every time. Submission by deadline. One that has to be serving one of the listed areas. So all of these are good, but I'll ask another question. Does anyone know where we can find the answer? The NOFO, that is correct, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So we are back at the notice, specifically page 12, where we find the application review information and the review criteria. So we give you the specific criteria that our reviewers will use to evaluate our applications. This is primarily what determines a successful application. Then we provide some more details about what all of those mean. As you can see, the strength of your work plan is an important part of that. Also, the way that they reflect the National Performance Measure instruction. So it is really important to take the work that you want to do, the impact that you see, and translate it into RSVP, so to speak, translating it into our 6 focus areas. So that concludes our prepared content for today, which gives us a lot of time to answer your questions, which is great. One thing that I did want to say before I start to answer questions, to learn more about our stories and kind of our program, these 4 things are really great. We've added links in the chat, but the senior course stories I shared, that first link is where you'll be able to read some more of those. We've got impact videos, which are great because you get to see the programs and the volunteers telling the story in their own words, get to see them in action, if you will. National service in your state is a great resource. And then finally, we post the results of all of our competitions online at the website link, the transparency posting link, and you can actually go there and view successful and unsuccessful applications from the past on that site. So another great way to learn more about RSVP. So with that, I will start answering questions. Courtney and Debbie. So I see if you have identified a focus area, do you also have to have a funding priority, or can it be one or the other? So you will first choose a focus area. Then depending on the service activities that you want to do, some might fall under a funding priority.
Hi, Anne. Sorry, I was on mute.
No worries.
Once you have been awarded a grant, can you later add a second focus area that were not initially selected when applying for an RSVP grant?
So yes, so we start by providing 1 year of funding, but the grant is for a 3-year project period. So as you do continuations and renew and you kind of reevaluate the needs of your community, you're able to amend your grant to include other focus areas that you might not have initially listed.
Great. Thank you. Oh, this is a good question. Our organization will have one priority focus and 2 other focus areas. Is there a formula or a set percentage used to figure out how many total volunteers are required within each of the priority and other focus areas?
No, there is not. That's not proper. You just have to choose one priority focus area, but you can have as many additional focus areas that you want. The only requirement that we have is that for every $1,000 in federal funding, you must program one unduplicated volunteer into a national performance measure outcome work plan.
Okay, this is in reference to the examples. In the last example, Verona Harvest, why didn't she allocate all 100 volunteers to the Healthy Future work plan since they were all going to be working at the food pantry? Why did she only put 75 volunteers in Healthy Futures work plan and put an extra 25 in the community priority?
We'll have to ask the project director. They could have put all 100 volunteers into the one work plan, but perhaps they had something else that they wanted to do, that they put the 25 other volunteers in other community priorities. Good question.
Can you speak to the ability to adjust or modify work plans throughout the grant cycle?
Sure. So like I had mentioned previously, we want to make sure that the RSVP program is flexible and meets the needs of your community. You are able to revisit making amendments to your grant if awarded during like continuation time. So that's as you're preparing for the next budget period, or renewal time, preparing for the next project period, throughout the life cycle of your grant, working with your portfolio manager that you would get. So it is possible.
And can you have multiple stations for the same focus area?
Yep, you can have multiple stations for the same focus area. What you might see, let's see if any of our example organizations did this. Well, we could, hold on. Let's say for Active Aging Verona, their first pairing of H4A to H17 and H4A to 12 could be multiple stations. It could be at the same station. Actually, all 4 of these could be at different stations or the same. I saw a question about unduplicated volunteers that I think I need to be clear. Can your unduplicated volunteers in the focus areas be included your partners? Barbara, could you expand upon that? I'm not sure I understand the question. To the questions about learning more about RSVP programs in your state or area, I would recommend going to national service in your state and also to the transparency posting links that we publish. National service in your state will kind of show the numbers in your state in terms of senior corps and AmeriCorps, and then the transparency postings will show applications that were funded in the state.
So we have a couple of questions that have come out about COVID, and I just want to address them really quickly. Senior Corps is very, very aware of COVID. We are actively working with our grantees to do our best in response to COVID. Unfortunately, we are in the same boat as you all in terms of kind of not really knowing what will happen next. There are some resources, COVID-related resources on the nationalservice.gov site specific for Senior Corps, but we can say right now that none of our program regulations or statutes have changed due to COVID, and so there is no specific change or update for RSVP competition. And so our competition guidance is as stands on the website. And if you are interested in any of the things that Senior Corps has done at this point in response to COVID, you can definitely take a look at it on our Managed Senior Corps page. However, again, there is nothing COVID related that we've instituted for competition.
Thanks, Courtney, for that. I've seen a couple of questions asking about multiple organizations being a grantee. Multiple organizations cannot be a grantee. Only one organization can be the responsible party. Now, that's great. If you've got collaboration in your community, perhaps those other organizations can serve as volunteer stations, but only one organization can be legally responsible for the grant. I've seen a couple of questions asking about the amount of funding on Appendix A. So the amount of funding listed on Appendix A is annual funding. So just for one budget period, not the entire 3 years. Pending appropriations from Congress and satisfactory performance, you would get additional funding at the continuation time. Okay, thank you, Barbara. So if you have partners, can they be counted as unduplicated volunteers? For instance, we have about 4 partner organizations that we work with. So those 4 partner organizations could serve as stations. You would be responsible for recruiting volunteers that would serve as unduplicated volunteers at those organizations or your own organization. I saw a question about choosing outcomes and I lost it. Sorry. Do you pick the top one or complete multiple work plans? So it really depends on what you are planning to do as an organization and how you want to allocate your volunteers. So the veterans and military families focus areas, there are a lot of output and outcome pairings that you can do, or a lot of outcomes that pair with an output. Let's say you want to allocate volunteers into 5 service activities that kind of span 5 outcomes. You would create 5 work plans. So you would create a work plan for each service activity and each pairing that you wanted. All of the slides and the recording will be made available by the end of the week on the nationalservice.gov website. I saw a question and I can't find it. I keep losing these about when the funding opportunities will be available again. So the way that we do competition for the RSVP program in particular, we have a 3-year competition cycle. So we've been working, this is the year 3 of a 3-year competition cycle, working through our portfolio of geographic service areas. And then there goes a period of 6 years, 2 project periods, and then competition again. For our other senior core programs, the foster grandparent and senior companion program, we do have replacement and expansion competitions more regularly.
One of the questions, I don't understand capacity building. It's not a focus area, but it's included in the national performance measures. Can you speak more to that, Anne?
Sure. So we've got the focus areas, which there are 6 of them. And then we've got capacity building, which is a goal of the agency. So you can create a work plan that is focused on capacity building, but you need to have at least one work plan that is in the 6 focus areas. So disaster services, veterans and military families, healthy futures, and the rest. I've seen a couple of questions about where these documents are located. You will find all of the resources at nationalservice.gov/RSVP competition. I saw a question about geographic service areas. So within our 3-year competition cycle, different geographic service areas were up for competition. And as we move into our other programs, replacement and expansion competitions for those, we'll have different geographic service areas available. For the question about organizations in the area that had the grant previously, I would recommend going to the transparency posting link. Remember to add your questions to the Q&A pod. Courtney and Debbie, were there any questions asked previously that we didn't answer aloud that would be beneficial for the good of the group?
I don't think we had too many other questions. There are some that are coming in now. Okay. There's a question about if the OFMS should be submitted again if you've already submitted it with another application. Monica, I would say to follow the instructions in the NOFA and on the competition website as they appear. That's the best answer we have to that. What is the best way to get notified when a grant is available for my geographic service area? Genevieve, we do have a listing for Gov delivery that I believe you can sign up for on nationalservice.gov. And can you speak more to how we can get people onto our mailing list?
Sure. So definitely go to nationalservice.gov and sign up for our Gov delivery messaging. You can sign up specifically for funding opportunities. Now, I can't promise that it will be specific for your geographic service area, but when there are new funding opportunities available, we will be able to contact you.
And then one last question we have, Barbara wants to know any suggestions or recommendations we have about recruiting volunteers. Barbara, I'm going to say we unfortunately cannot answer that question, but a good rule of thumb to everyone out there who this may perhaps be their first time submitted an RSVP application is to review the website, review the RSVP competition website, review our Senior Corps website that is on the nationalservice.gov site. There's a lot of information and a lot of resources on nationalservice.gov, and that may be the best bet in terms of anything that you need in terms of submitting your applications.
I saw an Appendix A question come in. Is the amount listed per a geographic service area the total amount available for competition, or is that the highest grant amount available? So that is the amount available for the specific geographic service area, and you must apply for that particular amount. So in the case of Verona, they would have to apply for $75,000 and 100 unduplicated volunteers.
There's a question about what is the best way to get help if you have trouble. If you are having trouble with e-grants and the application, the best way to get help with that is to call the National Service Hotline. That number is listed in the NOFA. If you're having trouble in terms of calling into the National Service Hotline, there's a live chat option that you can use, and I believe there may also be a website, email account that you can email to. All of that information is going to be in the NOFO, so please, again, review the NOFO. We've given as much instruction as we can based on our policies in the NOFO. The other option, if you're having just a question general about either the NOFO or anything that you've read on our website, you can email the RSVP mailbox at 2021 rsvp@cns.gov.
That's right. And I'll put in a plug for the rest of this week. We've got understanding performance measures tomorrow, and then on Thursday, we'll spend an hour talking about submitting your application in eGrants. The last question that is in the Q&A box about match. So we'll touch on match was talked about in the first couple of sessions. So I first recommend listening back to those recordings. But let's say you are, in the question it says, if the amount is $75,000 for 75 unduplicated volunteers, does that amount include the 30% match from the sponsor? Or, sorry, it's cut off. Courtney or Debbie, could you read the question? It's looking weird on the screen.
So the question is asking if the federal funding amount includes the match. So the federal funding amount is only the amount of funds you would get from CNCS as the funder. The match is money that you would put in addition to the $75,000 that CNCS is giving you.
Thanks, Courtney. And I'll just add that match is a sliding scale. So for year 1, 10%, year 2, 20%, and year 3, 30% for new to a geographic service area applicants. If you're an incumbent, you come in at that 30% unless you are applying for a new geographic service area. So it looks like we are at time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope you were able to learn something new from us, and we look forward to talking to you tomorrow and Thursday. Have a great rest of the day. Bye, folks.